And I think, as many of you know, the Syrian government has chosen to fight this war not simply by attacking the combatants on the other side, the legitimate way of fighting a war, but rather by attacking civilians in opposition-held area, with the aim of making their lives as miserable as possible, to try to build animosity against the armed opposition as a way of trying to promote flight in order to, in a sense, destroy the economy, the support network that the armed opposition might use to just gather supplies. It has done this by bombing, by shelling, by various forms of explosive attack. But it's also done this by trying to deprive the civilians in these areas of the sustenance of daily life, of medical assistance, of food, and of other necessities.
More than 5 million Syrian children, the equivalent of the number of American children in the largest 25 school districts in this nation, are not attending education, are not getting education. A lost generation, a generation deprived from basic needs, from dignity, from security, from health care, from basic nutrition, and even vaccination. This generation will grow angry at the world, angry at us, for leaving them without much support for the past 2.5 years. This is happening under our watch, under the United Nations watch, and all of us are responsible. Every American who does not donate to help Syrian children is responsible. Every American who does not pick up the phone and call President Obama or write an email to his senator and congressman is responsible. We should tell our policymakers, what have you done to stop the atrocities against the Syrian children?
To see this severe chronic malnutrition, stunting and wasting in Syria. And as we approach the third year of wasting, of deprival of food, what we're seeing now is not starvation as a passive process, but something that has been actively done to these children and civilians. And that's entirely consistent with this policy of attacks on the healthcare system, of destruction of hospitals, of denial of public health, of erosion of support for these people. So not only are we seeing starvation, but now we're also seeing, on top of that, we're seeing polio, as chronic malnutrition renders children so easily infected by these diseases, measles, colds, flus, and now polio, where we see an epidemic across a country which had previously been free of polio for 18 years. Food has been used as a weapon of war for centuries, but it's very rare to have food available in the middle of Damascus, while a few kilometers down the road in Muadamía, people are actively being denied food and actively starving. This is a crisis, a catastrophe that we haven't seen before, and that I, as a humanitarian, a public health expert, a paediatrician, have not seen before. The scale of this attacks on the healthcare system are unprecedented. And the only way that I see forward is to bring a mandate of cross-border assistance where food can reach these children, where we can mitigate this disastrous, this human catastrophe that we're seeing right now. Children are always the most vulnerable to war, but in this war, they are defenseless against the serial assaults made against them on practically every level.
A Syrian woman named Suad Naufal, an ordinary teacher in Syria, turned courageous civil activist protesting against all forms of authoritarianism, Assad and Islamist, has, since November, organized dozens of Syrians into a hunger strike to call for cross-border and cross-line access for humanitarian aid for besieged, starving Syrians. A courageous young man named Qusai Zacharya in small-town Muadamía, Syria, began his hunger strike on November 26 for the same humanitarian goal. Dozens of people today and tomorrow in Dublin, London, Madrid, and other cities will hunger strike with Syrians tomorrow, because that hunger strike of Qusai and Suad has expanded into an international solidarity fast.
First of all, I want to thank each and every one of you for this amazing efforts to bring such support for the Syrian people. I'm talking to you from a small town in the west suburbs of Damascus called Muadamía Qusai. This small town have witnessed all the demons of death that the Assad regime has launched against his own people after they dared asking for freedom and dignity. But even in 21/8, we have witnessed sarin gas on our town, but we have never, ever seen more horrible way to die, such as having people starving to death.
Clear is that we've come together as faith leaders, as civil society groups, to say that we are going to push back against the strategy that the Assad regime has chosen, and that is to dehumanize his own population, to dehumanize them, to ensure that the international community views this conflict through a political and military lens and not a humanitarian and human lens. And to a large extent, unfortunately, the international community has fallen prey to that strategy that the Assad regime has chosen. He has chosen to shut down all access to the besieged areas. He has chosen to use food and medicine as a weapon in his war. And he wants to ensure that the stories that were just told and the stories that are being told to you by everyone who was on the ground, that those stories do not get out into the international community. Because if it does, then that will awaken the conscience of the international community.
I have joined others in a day of fasting in solidarity with Saad Nofal and Qusai Zacharya and other Syrians under siege. We're part of the International Solidarity Hunger Strike. In New York City, my organization seeks to bring religious leaders of different faith traditions together across religious lines by addressing shared concerns. Few of the issues that we deal with on a daily basis rise to the scale of calamity of what has brought us here today. The magnitude of the suffering inflicted on the Syrian people is truly an issue that cuts across lines of race, religion, and nationality. Truly, what is happening in Syria is the world's problem to address.
Organization, and we are asking our faith leaders and people from various faith traditions to stand in solidarity with Syrian nonviolence movements who took this action as a nonviolence resistance in front of tyranny. And also we are asking our members to join us. I'm fasting today in support of Zacharya and other members of the Syrian nonviolent movement, because I heard them when they said the only weapon we have is you and your support, and we are asking our members to support them.
It's a rolling hunger strike. It began on December 20th. It was launched in Minnesota by the peace group Friends for a Nonviolent World, who began it there, and it continues until Geneva. It continues until January 22. People sign up by writing an email to stopthesiege@gmail.com. You include your name, the date you'd like to fast, or ask to be assigned an unassigned date between now and January 22nd, and any affiliation or title that you wish.
I just want to add to this that we have really very prominent faith leaders and civic leaders who pledged to fast for one day to support of the Syrian children under siege. Some of them, I'm just going to mention names, and you can add the names. I'm not going to remember all of them. Mr. David Miliband, who is the director of the IRC, International Rescue Committee. Congressman Keith Ellison from the 5th District of Minnesota. Philosopher Naum Chomsky, Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid, the president of the Parliament of the World Religion, and many others. If